Good morning, Father Wade, on this October 14, 2018. Can you tell me, Father Wade, what is the sermon about today?
The sermon today is about Jesus. And it's about Jesus entering a time where he was setting off on a journey. And he knew it would be a journey of change. And he encounters a man with many possessions. And their encounter, their conversation, is transformational for us as well.
By the first half sentence, as Jesus was setting out on a journey. Often when Mark or the other Gospels write, they will say, as Jesus prepared to go to Capernaum, or to the Sea of Galilee, or to Tyre and Sidon. But in this case, it says he's going out on a journey, so it's suggestive, it's evocative of more than that he's walking somewhere. It's less about, it seems to me to be less about physical space of this community to the next community, and that in fact it might be more of a journey in terms of what we think of as a spiritual journey. You might say, well, everything Jesus did was spiritual, right? But in reality, not everything for him was thought. He thought through this as spiritual. What he was doing was obeying a call to God, and in this moment, in this time, Mark at least believes Jesus is going into a space, going into a spiritual realm of which, like when he went into the wilderness of Lent, he's going somewhere that might change him, that might grow him in some way. So he sets out on this journey. And one of the images that sociologists and those in the psychological profession talk about a lot is when you go into a time where you may be facing change, that you enter a space that's an in-between space. And many of you know the word liminal as a space that is, you're here and you know your life and you know what constitutes the normality of your life. And then whether it's something that is crushingly given to you, some change you didn't want, or an ache in your heart for something more, or a hole in your soul that you know needs feeding and you know you can't bring that change about for yourself. There are many ways we enter into a liminal space, some by choice, some not. Spiritual growth as an idea is an invitation to leave what you know as your normal and what's comfortable to you, into a place that might change you, that might, as you encounter that space, you might be transformed from one thing to another. So a liminal space is a threshold between what I am and what I could be, or what I might be. So if I want to think of Jesus beginning, as Mark sees it, is beginning a journey in some way that constitutes Jesus entering into, yet again, a liminal space. And he immediately encounters a man who runs up and kneels before him, a sign of abject humility, and kneel before him. And that man says, "Good teacher, what must I do to inherit eternal life?" And Jesus says, "Why call me good? God alone is good." So it's almost like this exchange of humility, where the man comes and says, I admire you and want to learn from you. And Jesus says, but first, know that I am a human too. I'm a human too. I'm capable of being changed. I might have something good to say to you, but understand we're in this life together. And that's Jesus' message for us all the time. Why do you call me good? No one is good but God alone. He recites the commandments. And the man says to Jesus, "Teacher, I've kept all these since my youth." And in a very amazing sort of God-inspired compassion and empathy, Jesus, the human face in the beating heart of God, begins to glow with, the word is agape. It's a kind of love that is self-giving and entirely for the sake of the other. And Mark says he loved him as he spoke to him. Because quickly we learn that wherever Jesus is an opportunity for liminal space to be available to us. Wherever Jesus is, whenever we have the time, whenever we have the ease of our lives, or whenever we declare a desire to encounter Jesus in silence, in the streets, that Jesus can speak truth to us. Jesus can speak compassionately to us about our situation. And he says to this man, one thing you lack. One thing you lack. Go sell what you own and give the money to the poor, and you will have treasure in heaven. Then come, follow me. Let's go together. So not only was this a liminal period for Jesus, it was a liminal period for this man. Where Jesus is, liminality is possible. Change is possible. When the man heard it, he was shocked and went away grieving, for he had many possessions. When you think about a liminal space, sometimes we have to figure out, how do I understand that to where I can distinguish the moment I'm in? It seems vague in some respects, unless there's some crisis facing us in this instant that we can actually recognize ourselves in. A liminal space is, I think, the most perfect example of it is the 19-year-old kid that enlists in the Army, or in one of the armed services. And he shows up for boot camp. She shows up for boot camp. And they're stripped of everything that constitutes their individuality. They're a soldier, they're a sailor. They're no longer necessarily the same individual they were. They go through this common training, and it's terrifically difficult, and they are broken down, deliberately broken down and built back up as a team. In some sense, who I was before is not exactly the same. It's a liminal period, that training, and we know that in lots of ways. That personally, as when I made the decision that I wanted to be a priest, and the church affirmed that, and I went to seminary, I was a really fairly poor student in college. And one of the bishop's assistants told me, Merrill, I can hear that you're called by God to be a priest, but I don't think you've got the ability to learn. I mean, look at your grades. So, I mean, you talk about a liminal place where I was bound and determined to prove to God, the dean, Canon Colton Smith, the President of the United States, anybody that would listen, how motivated I was to learn. And so that the space I was in was, I was already motivated to learn, but I haven't proven anything to anybody, including myself. And so I was in a fairly restless and anxious state, waiting to see who I was. Could I be academically? Could I meet my peers? Could I do the work? Was I capable? Was I worthy of it in many respects? And so that kind of space where you're something but you're not where you're going is a state that sometimes is very brief and sometimes it's a little longer. But what you experience in this liminal place is a sense of confusion. And then a little bit of maturity takes place where we realize, oh my gosh, I've never, ever been in control of all the outcomes that I thought I was. That I get luck, I get support from God, I get encouragement from others, I get help when I fail. When I succeed, somebody knocks me back down where I deserve to be. And I begin to realize that this life that we have is not about me being great. Not me proving myself to others. I have never quit trying. But I did learn in that liminal space is that there's going to be a surprise. I had a really hard time in seminary in my personal life in some ways. But I also discovered in the midst of when I doubted I would ever remarry that there was a woman that I was going to meet. She's not here right now. She's at the 8 o'clock service. But that was I didn't know, right? And so there is life, this liminal spaces where we have a chance to stop. We can choose these, or they're going to choose us. And so this man that had many possessions, he came to show himself to Jesus, and Jesus says, one thing you lack. One thing you lack. And Jesus says to the disciples, how hard it will be for those who have wealth to enter the kingdom of God. And his disciples were perplexed. You bet they're perplexed. We are as well. It is easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for someone who is rich to enter the kingdom of God. Jesus sees this man. He loves him. And he sees how crushed the man is. And how disappointed Jesus is that they didn't team up in that moment. In that liminal moment where that a yes, however impossible that feels to you and me. We're Americans. Our money, our wealth, what we own, our time, our desires, our comforts are at the center of our attention unless they're stripped away from us somehow. Or unless our hearts are broken open in such a way where we find ourselves in a fresh place of generosity that we didn't know we could be like that. Nobody encourages us, really encourages us to be generous in a way that we want to hear it. You know, I just think about the creature comforts of her life. If Crystal was here, if she were here, I looked at her and I said, I, Merrill Wade, confess that I have more need for creature material comfort than 95% of you in this room. I probably don't have a greater need necessarily for flashy, showy objects. I think we probably all have some measure of taste about that sort of thing. But I, to be comfortable in bed at night, require the exact pillowage of which I alone can deduce what that pillowage is. I have to have a separate fan on me with just the right breeze. If it's too light, I'm miserable and sweaty and sad. And if it's too much, then that's too much. The temperature has to be 68.286. It's pathetic. It's pathetic. Okay, if you have ever been on the vestry or any committee of this church, and I happen to be, for whatever reason, the last person walking into a meeting, the dead air conditioning, here comes it. It was 74 degrees. I thought I was going to melt. So I bring it. What I'm trying to say is, I don't stand before you as your priest pretending like I got all this worked out about how to enter and what to ask for God in terms of change. Change is uncomfortable. entering a liminal space, whether it's retirement or a diagnosis or a desire for God. An actual desire for God will not make you happier, more comfortable. It lays before you. Jesus stands before you and says, every one of us, one thing you lack. You are loved. You are so totally cherished, is Jesus' point. I don't know how to even breathe the air of that cherishing. It's so gorgeous to contemplate. But one thing you lack on this journey, this stage, is honesty. Is God's honesty. It's God's waiting room for us and speaking to us as a divine physician. One thing you lack. And that is hard news for us. We're perplexed by it. I think as Americans, we have to know that when it comes to wealth and money, this is very central to our security and very, very central to our identity. So this particular text will speak to each one of us in our own situation. And I invite you to take that on, that hard question about in what way is your heart, is your pattern of giving, your desire to serve, in what way, how do you know when you're holding back? How can you know when what you're doing is in somewhat, whether it's giving to church or charity or whoever it may be, where your heart can be broken a little bit and you can start stepping into something that's really hard for you. What causes you to hold back? What fear, what resentment, whatever it is. All of us have a message from Jesus in some way that's good for us. That's good for us. Which brings us to one of the seasons of the church's year. Right? We have Advent and we have Christmas, and then we have the pledge campaign for the next year. And it does cause a little nervous laughter. It does for me. Because, at some level, it falls to your clergy and your wardens and your vestry to state the obvious about, this life together and what we expect when we walk in the door and what we expect when we read the weekly word or what we're going to do when we gather or when we go out into the city, out into the streets, into mission, the work that we're going to do. We somehow expect that to be there. And it requires every one of us to stop and say, where am I? Some of us, our earnings have gone down. Some of our capacities to have faced really difficult situations, and almost any pledge is difficult. Some of us have had a renewal in some way. We've got a capacity to give more money. But we haven't figured out how to do that. Do we have the courage to, or are we worried? All these things are very, very typical and normal experiences when it comes to how we handle our money and how we give money away. It's hard. It's also an opportunity for spiritual growth to stop and to think about your pledge. So on this day, some of you have, and thank you, have filled out a pledge card, or some of you have given online. And maybe have brought a pledge card along to sign and just to show that you have given online. Some of you may not be ready. Some of you may be the first you've heard of it. Some of you may be visiting. Some of you may be visiting a good bit and don't think you're able to give a pledge card if you want to. Well, you are. There's a step in that you can step into anything at any time. The idea that a pledge can be liminal is just saying that any time, any Eucharist, any gathering is an invitation to change. It may be uncomfortable, but every time we gather, because Jesus is in the midst of us, every time we gather is an opportunity for change, to enter a liminal space where we may not know what God's going to do with us yet, but we have faith. Our heart is moved to follow Jesus, and what Jesus does in response to that is to say, come to my altar. Come however you're doing. Come to my altar and embrace the love, the cherishing. Jesus saw the man and loved him. Embrace that love. Raise your hands and accept the Holy Communion. When you come forward in a moment with a pledge card, or if you don't have one, just come up as a sign of commitment to Jesus, to the church, and just place your hand on the altar as a sign of your commitment. Every moment with Jesus is an opportunity for new life. For me, that is very good.